It is a great privilege, and I think on behalf of myself and Siobhan, to welcome Katrina Crow to the stage. Katrina is the chairperson of the Irish Theatre Institute and has been a huge champion of ours for a number of years. We're indebted to her for her diligence and her commitment to the organisation and her work as our chair. She was formerly head of special projects at the National Archives of Ireland, and she was the manager of the Census Online project, which placed the Irish 1901 and 1911 census online free to anybody who wants to search it, and I would urge people to use it. It's an extraordinary resource. She presented last year, 2016, or the year before, my goodness, the year before, she presented the RTE documentary Ireland Before the Rising, and she is a member of the Royal Irish Academy. And you also might know she is one of the judges on the Irish Times Theatre Awards panel. So I would like to invite Katrina to the stage to chair this session, and there will be questions, feedback and observations invited from the floor later. Katrina Crow.
Sorry. Thanks, Jane, for that lovely introduction. It's a mixed blessing being a judge for the Irish Times Theatre Awards. You get through the year and everybody loves you. And then at the end of the year, 1/4 of the people you've nominated love you, and that's it. But we're doing it all again this year, so you'll all have to suck up to me for a little while longer, and I will take full advantage of that. Now, we have had a fantastic day, I think, so far. And I look out before me and I see the Irish theatre sector. And it's a fantastic testimony to the way that this day has been organised by Jane and Siobhan and their team, that so many of you have come here today and have stayed with us throughout the day. And we have people from all kinds of agencies from our department. Fergal Quigley has stayed for the whole day, and we're very delighted that he's done so. We see the Arts Council represented and many other agencies too. So that is hugely important, and we're very grateful. I had to get up this morning at 6:30, which is against my religion, in order to get a train from Galway to come here for this wonderful event today. And the reason I was in Galway was for the first night of Enda Walsh's new play, Grief is the Thing with Feathers, which is a sublime experience. And it reminded me what all this is about. It's the creation of theatre, which is the most fragile, beautiful art form. It's ephemeral, it remains in your memory unless somebody films it. But even if it's filmed, it is not the same thing as that absolute frisson that you get from a live performance, from people up there risking themselves to give you a sense of what humanity is all about. So we're not, us who are involved, we who are involved in the theatre sector, this is not for sissies. This is serious stuff that actually changes minds, changes imaginations, creates absolutely unforgettable images and stories for us. So we're serious people, and it is really worth looking at how we can keep the sector safe and well looked after, and that's what we're here today to do. So what we have heard today on the subject we're here to discuss, which is how to create structures and procedures to protect against bullying, harassment, sexual harassment and victimization in the particular workplaces and employment structures inhabited by the theatre sector. And they vary considerably, as we know. We've heard extremely eloquent and emotional contributions from Grace Dias and Andrea Irvin, who started off the morning to put us in the right frame of mind for why we are actually here, what the problem is. Very useful and informative inputs from Karen O'Loughlin of Equity. I think the figure of 59% or 57% of her survey having experienced harassment in the workplace, and only less than half of that reporting it, tells its own story about where the problem is. Those statistics are very, very useful. And of course, Sarah Durkin's wonderful work for Amplify Women, in her usual and characteristic clear, precise way, she gave us a wonderful run through what those guidelines are, and they have been used extensively by Jane and Siobhan for preparing the code of practice. And then we got our two wonderful women presenting the code of practice. And I have to say now that Siobhan Burke and Jane Daly really should be running the country. I mean, they really would know how to behave in the White House, and there'd be no housing crisis, and a whole lot of good things would happen. But they're only running the Irish Theatre Institute, which is a fantastic organisation. I really love it. And I hate the fact that I'm going to have to get off the board because of good governance. But I will. I'll suck it up and go. But they are truly great. Also, Kate Lennon, who was employed by us for this project to oversee the hard slog on it, and who has been a fantastic asset to us. And of course, Elaine, Claire, and Catherine of ITI, who have worked their backsides off all day today, looking after people, doing errands, getting everything together, overseeing the administration of this wonderful day today. And I want to thank Josepha Madigan, the Minister for Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht. I worked for that department for 40 years, and it kept changing its name all the time. So I never know what it's called these days. But anyway, that's quite simple. Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht. No arts at the moment. At some point, culture will vanish again, and the arts will come back in, and it'll be like Lanigan's Ball, but it's Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht now. I thought her speech this morning was remarkable. I think her own investment in this is considerable. I think she genuinely cares. That's certainly the impression I got the first time I had met her. Liked her very much. That her genuine commitment to this issue is going to be a great help to us. She's very open to ideas as to how to deal with the problems that we're facing. Now, I think part of what we discovered this morning, can I also say that Ita O'Brien's presentation was a revelation. We need this here urgently. Just the sheer practice of what she does must be so incredibly empowering to the theatre makers that she works with. And you could see that as she showed us that wonderful film. We could see how the actors were responding. I thought it was a fantastic idea to get her here to talk to us as a practical example of the things you can do to protect people. Two of the things that came out of the complicated morning we had, and one of the things we're all discovering is that this is complicated, that there are intersections of law and practice. There is the whole business of voluntary buy-in to codes versus enforced compliance. There's the gaping hole for the freelance sector, who do not have boards and no one to turn to if anything goes wrong. And Phillip McMahon, who I'll be introducing in a moment, is going to tell us practically how that actually works. So, two suggestions from me coming out of the day, and this is a day for discussion and suggestions and feedback. Firstly, that we hope that we're going to get buy-in to the Code of Practice when it is discussed and finalised and presented, I think, again to you in October. And I think I probably could say with some confidence that the organisations that are already working with ITI on this will voluntarily buy in to the code. And I'm hoping that every other organisation that has anything to do with the theatre will also buy into it, and that they will say, yes, we will read it on the first day of rehearsal, and we will monitor that it is being put into practice. But if there has to be a way of enforcing compliance, it may be that funding becomes contingent, as it is for supplying audited accounts every year to your funder, becomes contingent on compliance with this code. It has to be something that everybody accepts. There cannot be gaps there. Secondly, the aforementioned big gap in the freelance sector. I put the idea to the Minister this morning that what could be done is to establish a board of, or a panel, if you like, of qualified mediators who can be procured in the right way, and qualified investigators, of whom there are plenty in the country, to be available on a retainer, so that if you have an 8-week schedule, 2 weeks of performance, 4 weeks on a stage, which is not uncommon, something goes wrong in the first week, you can get a mediator into place the next day. And if the mediation doesn't work, you can get an investigator into place very quickly. So the procedures as laid out in the code can be followed by those who do not have recourse to large organisations with boards and HR operatives. We are not dreaming of asking the Arts Council to fund a HR officer for every production that comes up. But if we have some kind of a structure that is available to everybody who needs it, that could be a transferable model, if you like, across other sectors, because as it was pointed out this morning, the theatre sector is not the only place that suffers from all of this. So, those are two suggestions to go into the feedback box. Our final panel of today deals with the thorny issue of accountability. Where does the buck stop when someone speaks up and calls out an incident of bullying, harassment, or sexual harassment? Are our existing structures up to the task? If not, what can we put in place that will make them so? What has been learned from recent events? How do we deal with the issues specific to the theatre sector in this area? Who will demonstrate leadership in overseeing accountability? And we have a very distinguished panel of guests here today to discuss this crucial issue. So reading across from I have no sense of left and right. What's happened to me all of a sudden? Eleanor Methven is first, and I'll go through the rest in order. Eleanor is, as you all know, one of Ireland's foremost actresses. She co-founded the award-winning Charbank Theatre Company, which we heard a rude remark about this morning, quoted, with whom she toured internationally and was co-artistic director until 1995. She's worked with all the major Irish theatre companies and received an EMA and 3 Irish Times Theatre Awards for her stage work. She also recently received the Irish Times Irish Theatre Awards Special Tribute Award. And those of you who were there will remember the wonderful speech she gave, which you're going to hear a distilled version of in a minute. She has also been nominated for an Irish Film and Television Award, and she's a regular on both media. Yes, you are, you promised me. Next to Sheila is Peter Crowley, who was appointed chair of the Gate Theatre in 2015. Prior to this, he served on the board of the Dublin Theatre Festival from 2000. He's a founding partner of EL Partners, a boutique investment company established in 2000. I wonder what a boutique investment, you can explain all that to us now, because we need to know. Prior to this, he was CEO of IBI Corporate Finance. He's a qualified chartered accountant, and he spent 6 years as a director in KPMG Corporate Finance. And Peter is the man who has been at the centre, I suppose, of the recent report on Michael Colgan, commissioned by the Gate from Gay Cunningham, who is an adjudicator in the Workplace Relations Commission. Next to Peter, we have Phillip McMahon, who's a playwright, director, and co-director of Pop Culture Renegades. This is Pop Baby. His plays include Town is Dead, Alice in Funderland, and Danny and Chantel Still Here. Directing credits include Riot, which is now travelling the world to huge acclaim. We're hearing stories from everywhere about the wonderful success of Riot. Dublin Old School and Panty, High Heels in Low Places. He has sat on the board of Dublin Youth Theatre, the Project Arts Centre, and the advisory committee to the Stuart Parker Trust. He was a producer of Alternative Miss Ireland, which raised money for HIV/AIDS charities in Ireland, and 24-hour plays in Dublin, raising money for Dublin Youth Theatre. And very recently, he put together a wonderful set of productions in the Complex Theatre under the guiding banner of Where We Live, which I got to see most of. And the energy, the talent, the quality of what was on display there just tells us why it's important that we safeguard and look after and properly fund our young theatre makers. They are our future. And what I saw in those days in the complex was a remarkable future taking place, and we must do our very best to keep it together. So then we have Sheila Preska, who is the chair of the Arts Council. She originally worked in the Irish Museum of Modern Art, the Cairlen Gallery and UCD, and then became director of the Irish Film Institute in 1994. And I think I've known Sheila since those days in the IFI. It was a wonderful time. She was director of the Tyrone Guthrie Centre at Anna McCarrig from 2001 to 2007. Then she was appointed director of the Centre Culturel Irlandais in Paris. Wonderful place that many of you may be familiar with in the centre of Paris, which she ran extremely well. She was awarded the Ordre National du Mérite by the French state in recognition of her contribution to Franco-Irish cultural relations. And she has been chair of the Arts Council since 2014. And the Arts Council is, of course, the major funder of theatre in Ireland. So I'm now going to schlep across here and ask these wonderful people certain questions, and we will have time towards the end for all of you to get involved. And I'm just bringing my handbag because it contains my phone, which will tell me the time. Now, we're okay for sound here because we were having a few issues early, but I think that you can hear me all right? Yes. At the back there, you can hear me? Good, great, thank you for that. I've introduced you to Eleanor. I've known Eleanor for a long time, and I'm privileged to call her a friend. Not alone is she all the things I said about her, she's also a long-term feminist. She's a second-wave feminist like me. We are both thrilled to see the third wave rising up in all its glory around us. At times we thought that would never happen, but here it is. And she is a great human rights activist, an all-round good person. She made an extraordinary speech on the night of the Irish Times Theatre Awards in response to her Special Tribute Award. And I thought, since she was joining us on this panel today, I would ask her, because it deals with issues of accountability and responsibility, to give us a distilled version of that, just to put us on the plane where we need to be, an Olympian plane of goodness and sweetness, and serious questions. So, Eleanor, if you wouldn't mind doing that for us, I would be immensely grateful.
Do you seriously want to praise a bit of this speech, or do you want what I said I was going to do? Oh, okay, cool, fine. Everybody else is hiding their notes. I'm not. This is a work in progress.
That's you.
Well, first of all, Katrina, thank you very, very much for those kind words. I sound amazing. Unfortunately, I couldn't be here today, so I turned up instead. But it has to be said, thank you, Mom, because our sector is very, very fortunate to have someone of your breadth of intelligence and your integrity turn a careful gaze towards our sector. Thank you very, very much indeed, much appreciated. And that our sector produces people of the calibre of Jane Daly and Siobhan Burke, and that they manage not only to have the stamina for it, because it takes that, but also the imaginative aptitude and talents to create something where there was nothing before, to the benefit of our sector. That is something for us to celebrate. And that spirit of this sector, that applied creative energy, is something that this state should value and it should nurture, because even though they keep trying to do it, you simply can't put a price on it. Thank you for all you've done. Now, I know it was talking about accountability that prompted today's conveners to invite me here to speak on this panel, to which the title is, Who is Accountable? And let's face it, that's like the sort of question that the Sphinx might hit you with if you were standing trembling at the gates of Thebes and needed to get in before the shop shut. I won't go into what the first riddle of the Sphinx was, because that's the one, that she asked Oedipus. And I'm not going to do that because it's a major spoiler for the Sophocles box set you all have for the next Zoe's Day. But the second riddle of the Sphinx goes, there were two sisters, and one gave birth to the other, who in turn, she gave birth to the first. Who were the sisters? And the answer is night and day. Yeah, I know, I'm a riot at the Christmas dinner table. But no day without night, no night without day. They beget each other. One can't be defined without the other. Each depends on the other's very existence. I mean, if it was all night or all day, all the time, it would just be called it. And that's why who is accountable is unanswerable, because it's only a part of a question. Accountability does not exist without responsibility. Those who assume responsibility are accountable. We make ourselves accountable for how things are structured, devised, or handled by us, by having assumed responsibility for doing that in the first place. There can be no justice without accountability, no accountability without responsibility. You can hold someone accountable, but they might very well be the person you don't want to get within arm's length of. Some are offered and undertake responsibility and therefore become accountable on a voluntary basis. And others assume responsibility in exchange for remuneration, expenses, and bonuses. That's called a job. A job in a workplace is communal, and it has a hierarchy, line management. And it's legislated for, accordingly, to prevent bullying and sexual harassment in the workplace, thanks to long-term battles by trade unions and feminists within them. Managements did not come up with it as a good idea. Now, if that person doing that job behaves irresponsibly in that job, they are to be called to account for their actions by those who in turn are responsible for them and to whom they should be accountable. And when someone's irresponsible behaviour causes deliberate physical or emotional damage to others in the workplace, and the victims of that inadequate behaviour cannot have confidence in reporting it to those who have taken responsibility for the business ethics of their workplace, because the perpetrator is one of them and is highly, and in our sector, unusually privileged by them in being permitted to be so, then surely we have a situation signed off on, presided over, and in our sector, in receipt of public funding, which could almost have been carefully designed to promote and protect abuse of power. Surely that is dereliction of duty of care towards the workforce and maintenance of moral hazard in governance. No ethical audit taken or requested. But of course the question is not, how does this happen? It has been screamingly obvious for years how it happens. Why was it permitted to happen and to continue? Who indeed is accountable? And what will they proffer as evidence of understanding why it happened? Which I think is crucial to moving on and regaining trust and respect which they have lost from the people to whom none was shown through expedient neglect. And what will we learn from that? As I said in that speech, I'm looking for, I think, in order to move on, not just the structures to be put in place, but for a shift of understanding and a shift of gaze, and to understand how, not just in our sector, but in our culture, in this Irish society, these things are allowed to happen. That's all I've got so far. Thank you.
If Eleanor doesn't play Clytemnestra sometime on a stage, it will be a major tragedy. Thank you for those words, Eleanor. I think you've set the scene for us. Peter, thank you for being here today. I think it's important to say that. You've been at the centre of quite a storm over the last while, and it can't have been easy for you, and we are very grateful to you for coming today. 2 questions for you. The first is, what do you think has been learned from the commissioning and publication of Gay Cunningham's report into what happened in the Gate? And the second arises from the report itself, where Ms. Cunningham says Michael Colgan has a case to answer. To answer to whom? Which is the obvious next step. Do we have any recommendations from her as to who that should be, or do you have any ideas who that should be? So maybe tell us first about the learning process that you've been through.
Yeah, and first of all, say I'm delighted to be here and need no thanks for coming here. You know, part of what we learned at the Gate is that we need, you know, more open and transparent communication flow with everybody in the sector, and clearly a day like today is an important part of that. So I'm delighted to be here and to have this opportunity. So
can everyone hear Peter?
Can you hear? Yeah.
Maybe move that thing.
Move that over there. Okay, I'll move forward.
Sorry about this.
So what, you know, we've learned a lot of things, and I'd like to think, to Eleanor's point, that we have learned to have a shift in our gaze and a shift in our understanding, and I'll come back to that. Okay. But taking it in turn, maybe, I suppose, in relation to accountability, what have we learned is that real accountability has to have a foundation of clarity, clarity of expectations, clarity of rules and procedures. And one of the more dispiriting things I thought that was in the Gay Cunningham report, and I hope all of you have read it, and it continues to be available at the Gate if anybody hasn't read it and would like a copy. But one of the most dispiriting things was the idea that the unacceptable behaviour had become normalised in some way, and everybody adapted to this framework of sort of unacceptable behaviour and a really miserable work environment, I guess. And that's a sad thing for us to realise. But if there had been clarity of expectations, if there had been clarity of rules and procedures, and clarity of reporting and information flows, and importantly, clarity of feedback and reinforcement of the right kind of behaviour, that clearly wouldn't have happened. And we are implementing our current code of conduct at the moment, and we'll be informed by whatever comes out of this process to enhance that in any way. The second thing is that it's a daily thing. It's not sort of rock up to a board meeting and say, what's the story with dignity at work or that kind of stuff. It's a daily thing in the theatre, and it's a regular thing for the board. And I'll come back to how we think that can be dealt with. Because what we've definitely found is that reverse engineering accountability is messy, difficult, and an extremely painful thing for the people who've suffered from the poor behaviour. So it's got to be done on the day, every day. One slip, and you're on the slide. But that in itself probably isn't enough. I think, to your point about responsibility, the word I have is that there has to be real intent. I think, no sooner will we get this code of practice into place, and I look forward to the day when every single theatre organisation has signed up to it. But the next test is, what is people's intent? Are they actually taking responsibility? Do they really mean it at a fundamental level? That this wall of silence should break down, that people can speak out without fear of sanction, and that any poor behaviour can be called out, and that there will be repercussions. I would like to think that's the case, and I think that intent, or call it culture, whatever you want to call it, is as important as the sort of the code itself. I mean, in some respects, I was chatting to Arthur outside, and he said he's read about 50 codes of conduct. I mean, there's loads of codes of conduct out there, but what we're hoping to have in the gate, and led by Selena and supported by B, is a real intent behind this. And one of the key things in that is what I would call structured and unstructured communication, and visibility of both the company to the board and the board to the company. So, I mean, the primary criticism of the board in the report, for which we do take responsibility, was that the board at no time reached over the power nexus that Michael represented and found out what was really going on. So if you're going to go on the board of a theatre organisation, and I would still, notwithstanding everything that's happened, would recommend that all people of goodwill should do that, you need to allocate not only time for the traditional governance aspects of things at the board table, but you need to be out there in the company, not every day, because that's not possible in a sort of voluntary time constraint situation, but in a kind of a regular way. Both people from the company come and present to the board, and the board is out in the company finding out what's really going on, rather than what you see at opening night, which is all glitzy and fantastic. And that then spans, if you pivot to a sort of a more structured engagement between the board of theatre and arts organisations and the community that ultimately they serve. And we want to try and achieve that. Obviously, today is part of that. But, if I look back and sort of say, even for my own guiding principles, I was trying to navigate the gate through this. I wish that I had, deeper relationships with more of the people in this room. I know some people quite well, but I think, it'd be important for me and the rest of the board to have relationships and touch points, around the community in a real way, where, people can say, you want to keep an eye on that, or that's going well, that's going poorly, and I think that's important. And we're committed to doing that. And I suppose, without going on too long, I mean, the last thing that we probably learned most of all is that it's good to say sorry. And I want to repeat today, we've said it in statements, we've said it on the news of all things, but I wanted to say it here in this room, that the board of the gate recognises the poor and unacceptable experiences that people had, and that we apologise unreservedly for that, and we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that the gate becomes one of those leaders and that nothing like this can happen again. So that's what we've learned.
Thank you for that. Perhaps the question about what was left hanging, if you like, in the report, which did, I think, puzzle a number of people, and it may be that the terms of reference for the report did not include recommendations as to what steps could follow the investigation, which would be the normal next step in an investigation like that. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to that?
So, I mean, we've Gay Cunningham's legal counsel to thank for that particular phrase, case to answer. So maybe to roll back and understand the sort of, I guess, what our objectives were, which was, and each of these sort of concepts is important, is, to look after, under conditions of confidentiality and anonymity, the people who had, suffered unacceptable behaviour in the gate, and to preserve the anonymity and confidentiality that was asked for and that we offered, whilst at the same time moving quickly to establish the facts and to get to a set of recommendations that would help the gate put its house in order and make sure that this couldn't happen again. So the test, and it's a legal test, it's sort of couched in common law and employment law, as I've come to learn as so much focus has come on it, is to establish whether there had been a case to answer. And in normal circumstances, if Michael was still working in the gate and we arrived at this point where it had been established that he had a case to answer, you would roll on and you would have a disciplinary process, and that would take its course in the normal way. I mean, the reason why the case to answer test came in was so that we could arrive at the facts quickly and not be bogged down. I mean, I know some people in this room were hoping that there would be a judicial review led by the department and all of that stuff, and we heard all of that and we were doing our best to try and do what we could do, though we knew we couldn't achieve that. But I strongly believe that we've arrived at a clear picture quicker and recommendations quicker by going the route we went. So all of that's to say is that Gay Cunningham acknowledges in her, so our job now is to implement the recommendations of the report, and we've committed to do that, and we're well on the way. And in sort of recommendation 1, I think it is, or 2, which is that, Michael has a case to answer, and we need to, while recognising the fact that he's no longer an employee, we need to examine whether there are ways in which we can sort of access sort of another level of accountability. And to be honest, she acknowledges in the report that that is difficult because the contract between Michael and the gate falls away when he's no longer an employee. So the obvious steps that you could take are denied to you. So all I can say is, without getting into it, is we will continue to examine that. There is no easy answer. So that's the legal and the framework sort of answer to your question. But I mean, to my mind, speaking personally, not necessarily even speaking as chairman of the gate, I think Michael has a case to answer to this community, and I think that has been established. I think it is sort of in some ways up to him as to how he deals with that, and I'm not advising him, and I wouldn't pretend to, but I think that he has a case to answer. We will continue to do our bit, which is implement the report, implement all of its recommendations, and including that recommendation. But we can't create a framework that is where the most obvious way of dealing with something is denied to us. We can only do our best, and that's why reverse engineering accountability in some ways is difficult. But I do believe, and I do want to say, that the people who participated in the report, and I want to thank each and every one of you, will have, they A, will have been heard, and they B, will have created that shift in gaze and understanding in the board of the gate, because to say that the environment and the way of doing business is completely different is an understatement, and the level of interaction. And we can only be proven and regain the trust by walking the walk and making this happen, and people seeing that we're serious in what we say, and that's what we intend to do.
Okay. I think everyone in this room wishes Selina Cartmel the very, very best. She has come into a situation that she was not expecting. I think she's doing her best to create a really interesting programme in the Gate, and it's a hard business at the moment for her, and one could feel it from her on the night of the Theatre Awards. So I hope we can all step in and support Selina in what she's doing. We won't be holding our breath about Michael answering the case to this community. And I think you knew that when you said it.
Yeah, but I mean...
it would be wonderful if he did step up here today and tell us what he needs to say, but I don't see it happening. Peter, thank you so much for that. I think there will be questions for you from the audience when we're done with the presentations here, but thank you for your words today. Philly, thank you. Philly McMahon is a person who can tell us about moving from being an employee to being an employer, and perhaps finding himself appalled at the prospect of being an employer without the structures that are available to people in large organisations to deal with the issues we're here to discuss today. So maybe, Philly, you could tell us a bit about what it's like to be the person you are in the theatre sector, highly creative, in charge of all kinds of interesting things, running This Is Pop Baby, but also sometimes going into work in one of the major theatres and becoming an employee. Maybe talk to us about that for a while?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I kind of stay here with two hats on in a way, as a freelance artist, playwright and director, and also as co-director of This Is Pop Baby. So in that regard, I'm here on behalf of This Is Pop Baby, really. Myself and Jennifer Jennings are the directors of This Is Pop Baby. And we've got a small team of really great people working with us. And like many of the companies in the independent sector, this Pop Baby started 11 years ago at our respective kitchen tables, and like a rolling stone, kind of gathered glitter along the way, and kind of became what it is today. And This Is Pop Baby, and as we see it, all kind of independent companies, generations who've coming afterwards, exists in this kind of magical space, which is the emerging theatre company. And we're hoping one of these days we'll surface before we start going the other way. But what that means really is that we exist project to project, and nothing is guaranteed for us. And within that then, how our funding partners kind of structure grants and offer money means that often management is not covered in any way. Core costs are not covered. And that means that things like HR and the very things that we're talking about, there is no space for those things to be resourced. So very recently we were lucky enough to be able to take on a part-time company manager, Claire O'Neill, who is here. And within, we had a very decent powwow about this in the office yesterday, so I'm relaying some of the things that we all spoke about. But Claire comes from Project Art Centre with some HR experience. She's keen to impress that she is not an expert. She is the most expert in our organisation. And Jenny arrives after working both as an employer and an employee in Australia, where they have very formal HR procedures. And it's kind of startling for her to arrive home after 5 years there and to see how loose things are, I suppose, within our industry. And some of the things that were noted is just in terms of how informal often HR procedures can be, and the kind of gossip culture that exists in our industry, which we all feel very uncomfortable about. For instance, very recently when the Abbey jobs and the Gate jobs were up, everybody in this room knew who went for what, right? And that kind of just points at very loose and bad practice in a way. Recently, This Is Pop Baby. We've been on tour. We were on tour with a show called Riot. We've been to Sydney Festival, to Melbourne Arts Centre, and for a short stint in New York. We've got a touring party of 20 with us. It's a shock to us to be managing 20 people on the road. That job falls with company manager Deirdre Malloy, touring company manager, she's here. And then we've just finished a festival at the complex called Where We Live. It's now the 3rd month of the year, and we have created significant employment for 60 people already this year. And we don't have a HR department, of course. The company is very passionate, ferociously passionate about equality, fairness, inclusion. And without the kind of structures in place for us to have our own HR departments, I suppose we look to the institutions for best practice. We look to our big theatres, our big theatre companies, the Arts Council, Dublin City Council. We look to those people for guidance on what the best practice is. We are in the process of creating a handbook for our company, and before that's ready, we're working on an induction sheet, which is about where anybody that comes in to work for us has systems for reporting and for recourse. We did a straw poll in the office yesterday asking people, the people that work for us, there was 8 people in the office yesterday, and the great thing about that people are freelancing with us, they work for other, often younger theatre companies. And where would you go right now? Where would you go if there was a problem in the company? Everybody said Irish Theatre Institute. Your job for life. Yeah. The phone's going to be off the hook. And then other people pointed to leaders within our industries. When people said Lachlan Deegan, Cian O'Brien, people that had mentored them or worked with them, where they felt they could go and ask, what are my next steps? But I suppose that what we have identified is that what we need is that we need resources. We need acknowledgement of what it takes to implement the kind of things that we actually need, the HR structures and procedures, an acknowledgement of the time that takes, the money that takes, the personnel that takes to really be rigorous about that within a company. We need ongoing training, we need advice, we need to know where to go. And so I suppose that really we need leadership on this issue. And so that's where we're at.
Thank you, Philly. Well, I suppose that sets it out. We had Peter telling us how the Gate is changing its procedures in response to what happened there and creating best practice with a board and an organisation that has. You do have a HR manager, do you, in the building?
No.
You don't?
No. So even in an organisation.
So even in an organisation like yours, that's not there. Yeah.
We have one member of management responsibility for those. It takes on responsibility for HR.
Okay. And that in itself is interesting.
Things.
Yeah, that's even what we conceive to be one of the largest theatres we have in the country, they cannot afford to have a HR manager. Philly's situation, of course, is much worse. He doesn't even have a board. I think, in a way, the lack of trouble in your organisation may well be down to your professed commitment to equality and fairness, and that is a culture that pervades what you do. And prevention is always better than cure. And if that culture is there, this is one of the bigger questions I suppose we're facing today. How do you change a culture? You change it by doing what you're doing. And you can sort of see it in the ethos of the work that you produce. So that was very useful. It gives us a very clear picture of what is being endured in the freelance and small company sector, who cannot and probably never will get funding for HR presence permanently there or even available on a retainer basis. Sheila, I'm going to turn to you next as Chair of the Arts Council, the venerable institution that has been with us since the 1950s and which is the primary funder of theatre in Ireland. And I know that you just announced that you're rolling out a training programme on dignity at work, and I'm sure everyone would love to hear about that, where, when, how, who can sign up to it, how will that work. But also maybe to ask you, when you've told us about that, what you've got from today and what role you think the Arts Council might have to play in solving the problems we've identified, particularly the one around compliance with the code and what we do for the freelance sector who at the moment are being held out to dry.
Okay, thank you, Katrina, and everybody. It's indeed a privilege to be here and to be part of this conversation. And I'm the chair of a privileged organisation. With privilege comes responsibility. And I'm not going to duck Philly's comment about leadership. I'd like to return to that later. But let me start by saying that one of our privileges is that we can actually demand accountability. We are on that end of the spectrum where we control the allocation of quite substantial funds. Not enough, but still it's a lot of money. 70 million euros in 2018, and we're very, very conscious of the responsibility. But we can demand a lot from the organisations and individuals to whom we allocate funding, and it certainly has been my experience since 2014 that we have withheld funds, we have conditioned funding, we have requested extra information, and so on. I can't talk about any organisation or individual in any specific way, but just that has happened across the board. It's very difficult to make those kind of negative decisions because there are always consequences. We're talking about perhaps long-established organisations, we're talking about people's employment, we're talking about plans that have been long laid and are nearing completion and realisation. So we take it very seriously. We took the view that one of the worst forms of mistreatment of people, artists at work, was not being paid properly. So we've been laying this out for the sector since 2016, and from this year, 2018, you will not get Arts Council funding unless you pay professional artists professional fees. Now, obviously, there are going to be anomalies across the sector, for instance, different kind of arrangements to be made in relation to Fringe Festival and so on, but the basic principle is there. And amongst all the other things where there are boxes you have to tick, this is another one. We have run seminars on good governance. We will be repeating them towards the end of the year. We have created templates for constitutions. We are now running workshops on dignity and respect at work. We are working on our own equality policy. And all of these elements are going to be sort of critical in the creation of a culture and an environment which engenders respect and, I would suggest, also equality. Many times people complain to me about having to make Arts Council applications, how they've become longer, more bureaucratic, more difficult. I sympathise, I've been there myself, but actually this increased detail is what protects us, because we have got to be able to be completely answerable for the funds we receive from government and in how they are spent. I think that provides one of the strongest arguments for increased funding. And there is no doubt we need it. We need it for more arts activity and more support for organisations, not to mention all of the other issues which have been raised here today. And I would certainly plead with everybody to join with us and for us to act together in lobbying and asking for decent funding for the arts. It's a small amount of money in the larger scale of things, and the transformation in people's lives is just beyond counting. Not just performers, artists, and those who offer artists' experiences to the public, but to our citizens, our children, our older people across the country. So that's really the biggest argument of all. But in order to make that argument, we must be honest and we must be transparent and we must be able to say, this is where the money went and this is what they do for it. We have established an awful lot more peer panels. An awful lot of you, I think, have sat on them. And again, in my experience, everybody who has sat on a peer panel has found it a really interesting and good experience. But nevertheless, some of the big decisions remain with Council. We now get both a scoring and a narrative recommendation from the Executive of the Arts Council, and all of these conditions that we put into our funding grants form part of that recommendation. There's a whole slew of requirements now, from child protection policy to gender equality to dignity and respect at work. Happily, we have become very, very familiar with them. And it is a sort of a slow and meticulous process, really, to work your way through them, ensure that they are in place, ensure that you can tick the box, and then just all of us on a human level, and I really hear what everybody else beside me here has said, you know, on a human level we have to commit to that kind of high standard when it comes to dignity and mutual respect. We still have a lot of work to do, but this is a wonderful start, because talking about it is the only way to get there. Obviously, recording what we say is also important, because then we're held to it. I think we just have got to stand together. My instinct is to say fight together, but sometimes I think maybe I fight too much. Make the argument, make the statements, give the evidence, and just bring it back to that sort of basic human decency which allows people to have a professional environment where they can work to the absolute maximum of their talents and abilities.
What about the idea of the Arts Council, taking practical steps to address what we heard from Phillip?
Well, I think I've listed a lot of them, but I think, you know, from today, and we have discussed it already ourselves, to be honest, there is, I think, a necessity to have a resource. Whether that resource is located within the Arts Council or at some arm's length, I'm not sure. We need to discuss that. But there needs to be some sort of resource hub where people can go, where they're guaranteed confidentiality, where they're guaranteed assistance and advice when they need it, where there is professional HR advice and or counselling available. There are many companies who do this. For instance, we're working with one in rolling out these workshops, Graphite, but there are many others. So it's very encouraging that the Minister is interested in exploring this further, and if that is true, then we can act very, very quickly. I think it would be something which is necessary probably right across the whole arts sector and not just theatre, but I think theatre has taken a lead in this instance, and I think it could be a very, very good place to start. We'll certainly embrace it and empower it as much as possible, and abide by it ourselves. So I hope I've answered some questions.
No, that's very good to hear. And I think we come away today with both the Minister and the Chair of the Arts Council saying that they will be in discussion to create a resource which will have to be funded, presumably by the department, because the Arts Council has enough to do with the funding it has already. This is an extra add-on, but it's really worth paying for, to provide a resource for people across the theatre sector and other sectors that are affected that will provide them with professional mediation and investigation, which can then loop people back into the WRC ambit if they need to take formal proceedings. So I want to thank our four panellists for their presentations. I think everyone has gone to a great deal of trouble to prepare for today in cognizance of what an important day it is. And now we have some time for questions from the audience. Do we have a roving mic somewhere? We do, okay. So I'll just look out and see. Anybody want to start the ball rolling? Yes, second row there at the front. Just down here. Could we get a roving mic down? Great, lovely, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ciara Elizabeth Smith. I just wanted to ask, the opinion of the panel on something. If you find yourself in a position as an employee, as I did, where you have experienced sexual misconduct, bullying and sexual assault, and you make the decision then to go down the appropriate channels and to look at the codes of conduct of the organisation in place and to actually report it to your line manager, and maybe more than one line manager, and then they choose to not act or to perhaps act inappropriately. The prospect of taking that complaint outside the organisation to somewhere like the Workplace Relations Committee is so daunting. The thought of having a complaint within an organisation to come from outside in, I feel, certainly in my position, I felt like it would exacerbate the situation. So
I think that's part of the problem that a lot of people have expressed.
Exactly.
Retaliation. People fear retaliation.
And I think this is why people then feel like there is nowhere to go, because your position becomes untenable. You either stay and say nothing or you leave. What do you think? What do you think people should do? And if more than one person in an organisation has essentially failed or not abided by the codes of conduct, what do you think the appropriate action is, or where is the information that would point you to the appropriate action?
It's a very good question. And none of us here is a HR expert or an expert in employment law. But the person who was most impressive, I think, today in her absolute loathing of this carry-on was Karen O'Loughlin. And the reason she is that she's a trade unionist. And trade unions can be a very strong support for embattled individuals in the position that you're describing, where it takes, you are moving outside, but it's a recognised part of the workforce that trade unions have a right to negotiate for their members. So they're half in, half out, if you like. They're not complete outsiders. That would be one solution. I presume we are all hoping that when this code of practice is signed up to by everyone, that the necessary change in culture will come about with a lot of effort, with a lot of pushing and pulling, with a lot of monitoring of compliance, all of that, so that you shouldn't have to find yourself in that situation. But does anyone else have anything to offer on this dilemma?
Well, it's obviously I'm not qualified at all in HR or anything like that, but I absolutely hear what you're saying. It really ups the ante, and it's a scary enough position to be in. And I just wonder, with all this talk about founding training days and workshops, and I totally understand all that and applaud it. What I do know for a fact, experientially, that in our sector, certainly between the production side of things and the administration side of things, we have a huge amount of talent. That could be used and further trained up to do exactly what you're saying, perhaps allied to the ITI, because they certainly, like, you know, if your phones do start hopping off the thing tomorrow, you're going to be snowed under. But I don't see why, as opposed to we're always looking from the outside and bringing people in and paying them to do these jobs. If there is a job there to be created, which would be an ombudsperson or a liaison officer, I don't see why people from this sector who already have those qualities couldn't be trained up into it. And just economically, that seems to me a great green way of using money, if you see what I mean. It's recycling or whatever. But I can't speak highly enough of the administration and production experience that we have in this sector, and it should be further used and further trained, I think.
Absolutely true.
Okay, thank you.
Just up behind us here on the left-hand side. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
I just, an observation in response to that comment or that situation. There is an organisation that does already exist that has actually not been mentioned very much today, which is Equity, Irish Actors Equity. And I know myself, I'm guilty of it.
Karen O'Loughlin is the servicing secretary of Irish Actors Equity.
Yes,
she spoke this morning. So,
yes, well, but most actors aren't in Equity. and I'm guilty of having let my membership lapse. And I know when I ask other actors in the shows that I've been in recently, none of them are in equity. So I think it would be a good place to start, just one thing to come out of this afternoon, that everyone should join equity again and make it an organisation that has teeth again, because I think there is a feeling that it lost its teeth there for a while. I think that's coming back now, but I think we can really use equity in a lot of these issues that we're talking about. That's all I want to say.
Agree. If Karen is still here, I hope you have membership forms. They'll be rushing up to join. Anyone else? Where are we, Katrina? In the middle. Here or there? Where? Sorry, I'm going blind. Straight ahead. Straight ahead in the middle. Katrina, put your hand up. There you are, yeah.
Yeah, Katrina Goldstone, and I just want to commend everybody for what we've heard within the last hour, and a couple of comments and possible suggestions that cultural change, significant cultural change...
Could you hold the microphone a little closer?
As Eleanor's talking about, significant cultural change has to have various parallel actions, codes, and also penalties, possibilities of penalties. Sheila's talking about the conditions of funding. Lines can be added. I understand this adds to admin to say, can people hear?
Yeah.
Yeah. Simple lines can be added about, has there been grievance procedure within organisations within the last 3 to 5 years? Tick a box. How was it resolved? Was it through mediation? Not searching out, but possible ways of witnessing and making visible what is going on to stop the situation getting out of control in areas or in organisations where I've lost this again. This parallel process whereby people understand that there will be compliance properly sought, and that without the compliance there will be penalties or investigations or audits. But I want to talk broadly also about moral vacuums and moral spaces where these things can occur if we don't all sign up to cultural change and speak about it and speak honestly about it, and also look to the powers to be to enforce, because you will not get cultural change without legislative change, and also without funders and other people of influence saying, we're not going to fund organisations that have within them people who bully, harass, psychologically abuse, etc., etc., and that there should be anxiety amongst those who display this behaviour. I just want to also caution about HR consultants, that a squad of them are about to come in, because sometimes those people are brought in, apologies to everybody, for the management, and therefore they will not necessarily help a problem. They may compound it, or they may just not bother really to get to the root of what's wrong in the organisation. And I have one question, paraphrasing Audre Lorde: will the master's tools rebuild the master's house? In this case, I don't think they will. So we need new sets of tools.
Anybody on the panel want to comment on that interesting intervention? I think you probably answered your own question, Katrina, so it remains moot. But if anybody has anything to say, by all means, do. No. We've time for perhaps 1 or 2 more questions. So let's see, does anyone else want to say anything? Up here on the left. Sorry, my eyesight is getting worse with old age. Yeah, you, and then this lady across the aisle.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
My name is Declan Gorman. I am a freelance writer, director, performer, and occasional teacher. But I've also quite a long experience of having been a member of the board of directors of some very well-managed organisations. I'm currently a member of Driocht, and I'm very proud of that. And I was very fortunate in the early part of my career to work in City Arts Centre, to be involved in campaigns like the Miscarriages of Justice campaign, where I learned from a very early stage the importance of having in place codes of practice, but not just codes of practice, but that which Katrina just referred to as a kind of a moral climate. I want to thank Phillip for just actually naming that. When there's a commitment in the organisation, when the ethos of the organisation is for equality, then the next step is to actually find the language to implement it. I am concerned that codes of practice on their own can be quite meaningless because they can gather dust on a shelf when they're not implemented. I just wanted to make a practical suggestion in relation specifically to the freelance sector, which was named earlier this morning. The sector, now there's a freelance sector which is in receipt of no funding at all. And underpinning today's conversation, we have to be very honest about something, which is that there are many, many people existing in the freelance sector on levels of financial poverty which are unimaginable to many people, even in this room. So implementing things that are perceived as extra governance codes and so on and so forth can be quite difficult in that situation. But I would make the practical suggestion that when the Arts Council does provide an award of above a certain amount, 5, 10, 15,000 euro to a small organisation or to a collective of individuals, that they make that grant contingent on the named representative of that organisation attending a training which introduces them to the fundamentals of good governance, including the questions of bullying and sexual harassment. But having said that, I also think that it would cost the Arts Council very little to pay that individual for maybe 2 training days at a nominal rate, maybe 150 euro for those 2 days. Because the difference between, and I'm not picking myself out, but lots of people in this room have come here today and are not on wages. And there are other people in the room who are here today and it's part of their job and it's really important that they are there. But for those of us who are here and not on wages, I think we would commit ourselves to these things if a small stipend was made available to do so, and then thereafter perhaps be awarded with a certificate that you've taken part, which is renewable maybe only in 3 years' time. So if you get another award, you don't have to do it all over again. It's just a simple practical suggestion. And just one other simple practical suggestion for those who are actually working completely outside of the funded sector, but it really arises from the kind of ethos that Philly was talking about. But it can be a helpful thing on the very first day of rehearsals to actually speak openly about these things. And I've had actors look at me sideways when I've been directing in the room to say, we're going to spend 15 minutes talking about respect here before we begin the work. And I've had people saying, but we're all adults in the room, we all know. And I said, yes, we're adults in the room, but I think it's helpful to have a conversation about respect. And if there's a slightly larger group of people, perhaps to have a conversation within the unpaid ensemble as to whether or not somebody might be willing to be just the equality and respect officer, sort of informally within the group, to just keep an eye on it. Simple things like code of practice for auditions. It's not a good idea to be completely on your own auditioning actors. It's a better idea to have the stage manager or the assistant director with you.
Your suggestions are really welcome, but I have to tell you that this morning it was explained very clearly that the code of practice will be read out on the first day of rehearsals for every production in this country. So that's being implemented. And I'm just anxious that we have time for one more question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Perhaps we could go to the next person there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Declan.
Hello, my name is Louise White and I am an independent theatre maker. I'd like to say I'm a freelancer, but I'm the only one who hires me, so I can't. So I wanted to talk a little bit about power. Siobhan mentioned it earlier and how it's really one of the most potent things when we come to talk about harassment or bullying or any kind of abuse. And I think that it's a thing that we kind of flit into when we talk about it and we don't actually engage with it. And I think that it would be really useful in the same way that we outline what an employer is and what an employee is. It would be really useful to explicitly name how power functions in each dynamic, so in each group, so an independent company or a big organization. And if we do that and we name at the beginning of every undertaking where the power lies, because we don't like to do that because it's impolite or because it's awkward or because it really, really shows that in a room at one particular point the power might all lie with me and might not lie with other people. we must address that and we must name it. And if we do that, then we can be aware of how much power is held by people at any one time. And then those people must be absolutely aware of the lens with which they look at behaviours and how they know how to call out behaviours. Because on the power spectrum, if you're very high up in the power spectrum, you are not going to be concerned. It is proven time and time again that you're not going to have the same concerns as somebody at the lower end of the power spectrum. So if it doesn't affect you, you are often not aware of it. So you must really fine-tune your lens. That's where the accountability comes, in being aware of your power, everybody being aware in your power. Somebody said earlier, the idea of being able to call out a behaviour when you witness it, but it doesn't affect you directly, let's say. So it's the idea of naming where the power lies and taking ownership of that. And then we can figure out how to be accountable, all of us together.
That's what's meant by a cultural shift, absolutely, and a shift of understanding, absolutely.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic contribution, actually, and I think it would be a good idea if the code dealt with that issue of power as one of the lenses. I mean, I remember working in an organisation one time and saying, there's no politics in this organisation, and somebody turned around to me and said, that's because you're the politics, you know. And the Gate, you know, clearly has suffered from a situation where far too much power was vested in one individual, and you know, that must never happen again, and you know, we've said that explicitly. So knowing where the power is and balancing it, and in some cases dismantling it, but definitely at least knowing that if you have the power, that you're seeing things very differently to the people who don't have it, I think is critical. I think that's a fantastic contribution.
Lord of the Flies, one of the best books ever written, had an interesting way of displaying who had the power. Piggy has the conch. Maybe it's an interesting way, a symbolic way of saying who's holding the big shell in the room at the moment. It was interesting to hear you describe how power moves around. That's a very sophisticated version of how power operates in this sector in particular, where power can move around, quite interestingly. It's an interesting note on which to end. We have to get out of here. I want to thank you all so much for coming here today. You've put in a fantastic attendance. It's been a long day, but I think a very, very worthwhile one. I want to thank our 4 panellists here who really, really put work into what they were going to say to you this afternoon. To thank the wonderful Irish Theatre Institute, Siobhan, Jane, Kate, and their team, and to thank our Minister and the Arts Council for being here today. Please give our panellists a round of applause.
Thanks, Katrina.
Now, great. I thought you...
Okay, guys. The next step is a feedback process, as we said at the start of it, and there will be an opportunity to feedback via email to projects@irishtheatreinstitute.ie on the code. Any feedback on that is welcome at that email address. Also, with the feedback boxes here, if you want to email us on any other points, please feel free to do so on our normal email. As Katrina said when she took it to the stage for this last session, this process is not for sissies. So we really do need you to work with us on this next phase. And the phase involves the feedback coming into us. Liam Bell will write a report on today. Then we gather all the feedback. We look at our code again. We will engage with the 7 organisations, ITI, Independent Artists, and others, and then do another version of the draft, which we will put out there for consultation by an online methodology, with the view to having it available sometime in the summer, and a definite agreement with you that at the end of October we will be back for a 90-minute meeting in Project Arts Centre where we will face up to each other again, sit around a table in that context and say, what have we achieved? Thank you. Jane. Claire has been looking at our feedback both in social media and in the boxes, so here's just some highlights.
Yeah, just the last few little bits. Loads of people commenting on the need for an independent person or place where people could access support, mediation, counselling, and the possibility that this independent person or place could also be a point of information on previous proven complaints. Somebody mentioned that there is a similar structure in Canada called PACT, the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres, and that they work in this capacity to support freelance practitioners. There's also some feedback on Ita's session, particularly on her comment or on a comment in the session that actors should empower themselves, and somebody talking about that actors are already quite vulnerable in that situation, and that it should be people with existing power in the industry, such as directors, management boards, that hold the majority of the responsibility for making sure that the conditions are fair. That's it all.
Okay, this is definitely the last one. I just want to say just a couple of thank yous. Katrina mentioned some people already, but Siobhan and I particularly want to say thank you to the extraordinary team that works at ITI. Elaine Donnelly, our General Manager, Catherine Murphy, our Administrative Assistant, Claire Quay, our Playography Researcher, to Kate Lennon, who project managed this under serious time constraints, Maria Fleming and Leon Bell, who've been supporting us, Andy Cummins, who's stage managing for us today, and Jar Finnegan. Can I also say thank you to the team at Liberty Hall, Laura, Paul and Brian. And most importantly of all, can I say thank you to you. Thank you for turning up. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sticking with us, and stay with us. This is all about what we do together. And I think that there really is an opportunity for us to change, making positive, important changes. So thank you to all of you, and give yourselves a round of applause. Oh, sorry. I just have one last thing. We're incredibly proud of this. We've been trending on Twitter. And can I just thank our PR media people, Darren O'Sullivan, who's actually in New Zealand, but she set so much stuff up before she went, and Sabrina Sheeran, who has been here, and from Lurg Media in Galway, Orla Nicara, who's been our social media manager. I think we've made an impact.